In the current educational system, we have created a model in which we assume that all our students come in the same shape and form. But we know that this is not the case, and very often we encounter that there are students that do not fit in that model. There is evidence that shows that more and more often we have students who speak English as a second or a third language. There are some students that have different personalities, with some extroverts having different needs from the extroverts. And in more general terms, there are like students that have very different learning styles, for example, visual, auditory, and tactile. So taking into consideration all these factors, how is it possible that a lecturer in higher education can take into account all this huge diversity in the classroom? It has been suggested that lecturers can administer some standardized personality tests. This way they can know what is the proportion or what is the constitution of the classroom, and that way they can decide what approach to have more generally in their lessons. However, my personal favorite is to create my own diagnostic test. What I normally do every time that I start a new module is that I take into consideration the constitution of the class. I look at the number of nationalities in the class, I look at the proportion of male and female students, and just through informal conversations and questionnaires, I ask the students' expectations and personal needs, and based on that I can create some form of lesson that is going to try to take into account a heterogeneous student population. Whatever the approach that lecturers decide to use, I think that the aim is to create an environment that is not rigid and that is actually flexible enough to allow for the sizes of all the different students that we can have in higher education. Now, a question is, how can we teach students about inclusivity and diversity? In English language and linguistics, the topic that I cover, we have plenty of opportunities in which we can actually teach this very same topic and gauge our students in good practice in terms of inclusivity and diversity. One of the cases that I use is embedding lessons of diversity and inclusion in academic writing. It is well known that in academic writing there are specific standards that we have to follow, and in one particular lesson I teach students that they have to be mindful of inclusivity and diversity, and that they have to be respectful about all these different populations that we may be talking about. So in an exercise in seminars, I present them with different types of writing that are inaccurate or biased, or they are disrespectful to different populations, and what they have to do is to write a better writing that could take into consideration diversity, inclusion, and be respectful to all these different populations. So, for example, the students could be presented with a sentence that goes, "Research scientists often neglect their wives and children." This is, of course, an inaccurate sentence or something that doesn't reflect the diversity of the world, and they should actually write something like, "Research scientists often neglect their spouses and children," because this type of wording takes into consideration that scientists are not only men but also women. Another topic that allows us to discuss inclusivity and diversity is precisely that of linguistic diversity. We discussed that there are 7,000 languages in the world and that there's a huge linguistic diversity. For example, there are lots of indigenous languages that do not have a written system. There are some languages that are not even expressed through speech, but actually through the body and the hands, as is the case of the sign languages of deaf communities. Therefore, English represents 0.01% of all the languages in the world, and therefore the language that the students speak, the language that we speak at the university, is this exception, not the norm. Therefore, all these instances allow the students to think and reflect about inclusivity and diversity in the linguistic context.